For the last hearing of the Interior and Environment Appropriations Subcommittee on the fiscal year 2025 President's Budget. Director So and Assistant Secretary Newland, welcome to today's appropriations hearing. I'm happy to have you both here. Your presence underscores the significance of our collaborative efforts in support of Indian country. Also, welcome to Jillian Curtis from the Indian Health Services and Jason Frayagi from the Department of the Interior, who are accompanying today's witnesses and bringing their expertise to bear. Working together is paramount for the benefit of our tribal communities. The challenges faced by Native Americans and Alaska Natives are multifaceted, spanning healthcare, education, and economic stability. Therefore, our solutions must also be multifaceted and coordinate across various agencies. Your two agencies are inextricably linked. The social determinants of good health involve good education, a thriving community, a sense of belonging for Native American youth, safety and security, and access to good roads, clean air, and safe drinking water. By aligning our efforts, we can amplify the impact of our initiatives and address the root causes of the systemic disparities that tribal communities face. The Indian Health Service request for FY2025, fiscal year 25, is $7.9 billion, which is a 14% increase. The request would make up for losses that flat funding in FY24 have stressed the agency, given the required pay increases and medical inflation. The considerable increase requested for FY25 also would make strides in reducing health disparities by expanding services such as primary care, disease prevention, drug treatment, dental care, pharmacy, and the list goes on. Another cost driver in the request is electronic health records modernization effort, which is proposed to be increased by $213 million to keep that important effort on track. The Indian Health Service serves a population with unique and pressing healthcare needs. Native American and Alaska Native populations are facing health outcome disparities as compared to the cross-section of the American population. Higher rates of diabetes, maternal mortality, cancer, and overdoses not seen elsewhere. Over the last 5 years, the IHS services account increased just 19%. That's not enough over a 5-year period to address the rising healthcare costs and the health disparities that I noted. For comparison, the VHA account, the Veterans Health Account, increased 42% over the same time period. The VA also has greater flexibility to hire, to retain, to recruit healthcare professionals, authorities that IHS does not have. Director So, I'm pleased to see that your request includes several legislative proposals to improve on the status quo, such as a request to provide tax exemption for IHS health professions scholarships and loan repayment programs. The budget also proposes to make IHS funding exempt from sequestration, which the VA has already gained under the Fiscal Responsibility Act, while IHS was forgotten. I strongly support the critical funding needed to take care of our nation's veterans. We should adopt a number of the VA reforms to afford the same dignity to Native Americans and Alaska Natives. As Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor said in March at oral argument for an IHS-related case, quote, "The amount spent on tribal health care is about a third of what is spent on the average American." We need to do better. Turning to the Department of Interior's tribal programs, the request includes $2.9 billion for the Bureau of Indian Affairs, a $485 million increase, and $1.5 billion for the Bureau of Indian Education, a $154 million increase. These investments are the building blocks of continued economic development and the well-being of tribal communities. This funding will help improve student academic outcomes, address maintenance needs, and expand native language revitalization efforts. Teachers across the country dedicate each day to their students and provide them with the tools to succeed. It's only fitting that we give the teachers the tools to be successful in their often thankless work. I want to also touch today on the in-lieu and treaty fishing sites along the Columbia River. Thank you, Assistant Secretary Newland, for your continued attention to these sites and providing maintenance, law enforcement services, and repairs. It's vitally important that we make these sites operable and safe for tribal members to exercise their treaty rights along the Columbia River. I have visited a number of those sites, and was appalled at what I found a few years ago and greatly appreciate our efforts to do better. And speaking of the Columbia River, as I told Secretary Haaland, I am pleased to see the administration has pledged $1 billion in new federal investments as part of the Columbia River Basin Initiative in partnership with the 6 sovereigns. We have long sought a resolution to the destruction of homelands, disruption of salmon runs, loss of traditional subsistence practices, and a loss of culture that will never be replaced. I hope you will continue to work closely with the tribes to ensure that their needs are met as part of this initiative. For the second year in a row, both budgets propose to reclassify tribal sovereignty payments to the mandatory side of the budget. These are the payments necessary to exercise tribal self-governance and are the reasonable overhead costs to administer essential government services. As Chair Murray said in our hearing with Secretary Haaland last week, we are adamant that we must reclassify these funds to the mandatory side of the budget, where they legally belong. This is even more pressing given the pending Supreme Court case that could substantially increase contract support costs by $800 million to $2 billion or more per year. That's like an asteroid aimed at the interior budget. These escalating costs limit our ability to increase investments in tribal programs. Finally, I want to repeat that I'm calling for significant increases to the Fiscal Responsibility Act budget caps. These caps aren't at all responsible, as I'm sure we'll hear today in this very room that they are harming Indian country. They are limiting our ability to meet the needs of tribal communities, which means we're falling short of fulfilling our treaty and trust responsibilities. I look forward to our discussions and the opportunity to work together towards comprehensive solutions. And we are going to now turn to your comments, Assistant Secretary Newland, but I will defer when Senator Murkowski arrives if she wants to hold her opening statement or to pause in order to present it.
Ani, good morning, Chairman Merkley and members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today on behalf of the Department of the Interior to provide a statement on the President's budget request for FY2025 for Indian Affairs. And before I begin, Mr. Chairman, just want to acknowledge our Deputy Assistant Secretary, Jason Freihage, who's here with us today to help fill in the details if we get down that far, but I'll do my best to answer any questions members of the committee have. The President's FY25 budget request for Indian Affairs totals $4.6 billion, an increase of $651 million over the FY24 enacted level of funding. This represents funding for the Bureau of Indian Affairs, the Bureau of Indian Education, and the Bureau of Trust Funds Administration, as well as funding for the Office of the Assistant Secretary, which includes a number of program offices. The funding requested is an important step forward to meet our obligation to tribes and supports the President's executive order to reform federal funding and promote the next era of tribal self-determination. I've submitted a written statement for the record, and I want to use my limited time here today to focus on important areas of the budget. Mandatory funding for legally required payments, funding for public safety programs, Indian water rights settlements, and funding for Bureau of Indian Education and Management improvements. First, as you just noted, Mr. Chairman, we've proposed reclassifying tribal contract support costs and 105L lease payments as mandatory funding beginning in 2026. We are required by law to provide these payments to tribes upon their request. And in recent years, those costs have grown significantly. In FY 2025, the department will need an additional $232 million just to cover those costs, in addition to water settlement costs, to avoid cutting funding for existing programs like public safety, transportation, and education. Reclassifying these funds as mandatory aligns our appropriations with our legal obligations, and it protects funding for other programs that are essential for Indian country. I also want to speak directly to funding necessary to meet our trust obligations to protect people across Indian country. In FY 2022 and 23, we were able to work with Congress to secure an additional $131.2 million for public safety programs for Indian country. And I want to thank Congress and this committee for working with the administration on those increases. But even with those increases, our most recent report to Congress under the Tribal Law and Order Act shows that the United States funds public safety and justice programs at only 13% of the total need and obligation to Indian country. In addition, appropriations law directed 52% of that increased funding to just 16 tribes. That left only $11.5 million in additional funding to distribute to 182 tribes across the country. The President's FY25 request would increase public safety and justice funding by 17% over the FY24 enacted amount. That would include a $33.5 million program increase in criminal investigations and police services, boots on the ground. Those are specifically targeted to increase the number of officers and investigators all across Indian country. That would fund an additional 222 federal and tribal officers in tribal communities across the nation. The proposed budget would also fund an additional 120 federal and tribal correction staff at detention and corrections facilities. The 2025 request would get us from 13% to 19% of the overall public safety and justice need reported in the Tribal Law and Order Act report. Without this requested increase, the department will not be able to afford as many law enforcement officers, will not be able to meet court-ordered requirements to the Navajo Nation, and delay maintenance and operating requirements at tribal courts. The administration is interested in working with Congress to find a solution to meet federal commitments regarding current and future Indian water rights settlements, including the Wallapai settlement. The 2025 budget proposes legislation to provide mandatory funding for Indian water rights settlements, building on the Indian Water Rights Settlement Completion Fund established in the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. That Settlement Completion Fund went a long way in clearing the backlog of settlement obligations and the department has allocated over $2.4 billion of the $2.5 billion appropriated. However, more remains to be done. At this time, there are 4 Indian water rights settlements pending before Congress, and a number of other water rights settlements are in negotiations and likely to be introduced soon. The proposal would provide the fund $2.8 billion, $250 million annually over 10 years for existing and future water rights settlements, and $34 million per year over 10 years for ongoing requirements implemented by the Bureau of Reclamation associated with the operation, maintenance, and repair costs of settlements. The 2025 budget for the BIE is $1.5 billion in current appropriations, a $154.6 million increase from the FY24 enacted. This increase is critical to improving BIE school operations and modernizing facilities. For example, the requested increase of $36.5 million for ISEP formula funds is critical for helping schools achieve competitive teacher salaries, which is a top priority of our schools, and the Tribal Interior Budget Council. To improve school facilities, the budget includes a $5.5 million increase for facility operations and maintenance, and an additional $75.5 million for school construction. These facility increases are critical to continuing progress toward ensuring our BIE students are in modernizing, inspiring, and culturally appropriate schools. I also want to note the importance of reauthorizing the Great American Outdoors Act and the National Parks and Public Land Legacy Restoration Fund. BIE currently receives about $95 million a year from GOA funds, which is less than the average cost of completion of the most recent schools being built. Given these costs, replacing BIE schools in poor conditions will take decades, about 30 years at our current pace. So securing the FY25 budget increases and GOA reauthorization will help ensure the timeline is not extended further. I want to highlight the work our Indian Affairs leadership team is doing to improve operations. We're prioritizing recruitment and retention of staff in critical areas like law enforcement, awarding officials who move money from the BIA to tribal governments, as well as realty staff. Within our law enforcement programs, we've worked to ensure BIA officer salaries are in line with their counterparts at other DOI bureaus to help improve our retention rates and to be competitive in recruitment. We're focused on infrastructure investment by exploring opportunities to address the growing number of 105L leases and data improvements related to facilities. We're also improving timelines for land in the trust and other realty activities, and we approach these issues from multiple angles, including resource and staffing levels, process improvements, and making better use of technology. Finally, the increased funding requested in this budget is an important step to meeting our trust obligations to tribes. To support fully meeting our obligations, the President has signed Executive Order 14112, which directs federal agencies to increase their deference to tribal decision-making, streamline application processes for tribes to obtain funding, and removing restrictions and cost-sharing requirements consistent with the law. The executive order also directs the establishment of a one-stop tribal funding clearinghouse and requires agencies to measure and report annually on tribe-related funding shortfalls. I look forward to reporting to you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Murkowski, on further progress to meet the requirements of the EO. Mr. Chairman, I have submitted a written statement for the record highlighting how the FY25 budget request continues to focus on these priorities. I want to thank you again for the opportunity to testify and look forward to answering any questions you have.
Thank you very much, Secretary Newland. And we're going to turn now to Ranking Member Senator Murkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My apologies for being tardy here this morning. Thank you for your presence here today, for your leadership at both the BIA and in the Department of Interior, to welcome Director So, Assistant Secretary Newland. It's been a busy couple of weeks in the Appropriations Committee with the focus on the 25 budget. I think this hearing marks the last one before we start to write a bill for the next fiscal year, and with the two agencies responsible for tribal programs under the subcommittee's jurisdiction. So we got a lot to do here. But I think one of the things that we have seen is a commitment, a priority to work together to fund essential programs that serve tribes and Native communities. It's no secret that FY24 was a lean year for the agencies that were funded by this subcommittee. We had to make a lot of tough choices, but we did our best to maintain funding for the programs that are critical to Indian country and Alaska, including health, economic development, education, and workforce development, as well as water and sanitation infrastructure. And as we work to uphold the federal government's trust responsibilities, we've made great progress on the challenging issues related to contract support costs and 105 tribal lease payments. But the challenges keep coming. So, Director So, we're going to need to keep in close touch on this given the pending Supreme Court case regarding contract support cost responsibilities related to third-party payments. The President's proposal for IHS is roughly $8 billion, which represents an increase of over $1 billion above enacted, and again proposes to shift the entire agency to mandatory funding beginning in FY26. And while I agree that there is far more need than funding levels can meet and have supported advanced appropriations for the agency, I'm not sure how the constraints of the Fiscal Responsibility Act would provide for that level of increase now, or how we pay for a shift to mandatory funding in the out years. A couple Alaska-specific issues with IHS that I have raised with you previously, Director So, and the first is IHS's consultation policy and the definition of Indian tribe in that policy. I think you know IHS has been using the ISDEA definition of Indian tribe for many years now. It allows Alaska's entire tribal health system to participate in consultation. You well know the unique structure that we have for delivery of health care that involves Alaska tribes, tribal organizations, and intertribal consortia. We've heard no clear reason to change from the definition of Indian tribe after years of productive tribal relations with IHS under the current policy, so I would urge IHS to not undermine the existing robust tribal consultation process. Just don't do it. I'm going to mention the Alaska Native Medical Center, but we'll do that in questions. But Then turning to the Department of Interior, the proposed FY25 funding for Indian Affairs about $4.5 billion, close to $588 million above enacted. I also recognize the importance and the need for the resources for activities funded by DOI, but again, don't see how current law provides a path to that level of funding. The only promise that I can make as we look to write this bill is that we will continue our bipartisan tradition to prioritize the needs of Native communities. Sitting as the ranking member on Indian Affairs, I'm proud of all that we've been able to achieve together for missing and murdered Indigenous people. But as we mentioned yesterday at the hearing, Assistant Secretary, I think we're just scratching the surface right now. As I talk with Native communities in Alaska and across the country, public safety and justice investments are a top priority. And again, the hearings that we have had there in Indian Affairs have been important, talking about everything from adequate funding for PL280 states to address the inequities with respect to public safety and justice with non-PL280 states. This is a top concern. I've included funding for tribal courts in PL280 states in the Interior Bill for the last 10 years. I think we're making some progress there. We also mentioned the VAWA 2022, which established the Alaska Pilot Program and an Alaska Intertribal Technical Assistance Working Group. I'm not quite sure if we're going to have a good acronym for that, but we're hoping to see DOI actively participate in those programs too. And we're going to continue to support sufficient funding for the Small and Needy Tribe Supplement, subsistence, and programs that support Native languages. It's also important to me that tribal management programs are effectively contributing towards economic development while meeting natural resource goals. A lot of ground to cover, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the good work of the committee and our staffs as we work to build out the budget in this subcommittee for these important priorities.
Thank you very much, Senator Murkowski. Now we're going to turn to the Director of the Indian Health Services, Rosalind So. Welcome.
Good morning, Chairman Merkley and Ranking Member Murkowski and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on the President's fiscal year 2025 budget request for the Indian Health Service. Before I turn to the budget, I want to first acknowledge and thank you for your work over the years to grow the IHS budget as well as prioritize Indian health care across the Indian country. We are especially grateful for the IHS advanced appropriations in the FY 2024. This historic achievement that has greatly improved the lives of American Indians and Alaska Natives across Indian country. I am happy to report that because of the FY 2024 advanced appropriations, IHS has made 100% of payments to eligible tribes through compacts and contracts within the first 2 weeks of the fiscal year. I also appreciate the opportunity to share with you the steps I have taken as the IHS Director to improve transparency, accountability, and oversight at the Indian Health Service. As we seek additional funding and new funding authorities, it is critical that the Indian Health Service improve its internal operations to ensure safe and high-quality health care and protect and support the relationships that we have with tribes and urban organizations. To ensure that I fully understand the challenges and successes throughout Indian country, I appreciate the opportunity to visit with tribal leaders across the country in their space to better understand and also gain their input and perspective. In support of building a high-performing organization, I implemented the first agency work plan in January of 2023 that achieved 3 major accomplishments, including total system safety strategy, the IHS patient safety policy, and improvements to our purchase and referred care program, such as updating the medical priority levels, building a financial monitoring tool system, and training staff to obligate PRC funding in a timely manner. Building on the work plan, our 2024 agency work plan outlines steps that the agency is taking to address priorities as well as mitigate risk. The agency work plan addresses a wide range of issues, but also incorporates the recommendations and principles identified by the GAO with the goal of being removed from the GAO high-risk list. With your support, the IHS budget has grown by 69% in the last decade. We know that this type of growth is challenging to accomplish, and in a constrained discretionary funding environment. Over the years, the work with our tribes and urban partners underscore our shared goal to improve health outcomes for all American Indians and Alaska Natives. It is with this shared goal in mind that the administrative approach to the 2025 budget request for IHS. We know that despite our shared efforts, IHS is still underfunded. This underfunding of Indian health system directly contributes to the stark health disparities in our tribal and communities. For example, American Indians and Alaska Natives born today have an average life expectancy that is 10.9 years fewer than U.S. all-race population. Longstanding health disparities were compounded by the pandemic, with American Indians and Alaska Natives experiencing disproportionate rates of COVID-19 infections, hospitalizations, and death. Addressing these inequities is a moral imperative for our nation, and it will require bold steps from all of us to ensure we are upholding our commitment to Indian country. That is why the budget proposes to build on the enactment of advanced appropriations for funding the IHS as discretionary in 2025. Beginning in 2026, the budget will move all funding to mandatory. The administration continues to stand behind mandatory funding as the most appropriate long-term funding solution for Indian Health Service, and we know it is a significant change that will take time and collaboration with Congress, tribes to accomplish. We believe that this change of this magnitude is overdue, and we must deliver to Indian country. As we work together towards securing a stable, predictable, adequate funding to meet the needs of Indian country, we are committed to working closely with our stakeholders. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak with you today, and I'm happy to answer any questions the committee may have.
Well, thank you very much to both of you. As I said earlier, I don't love the Fiscal Responsibility Act, which I believe was irresponsible given the challenges that we're facing. But I was very pleased with the outcome of our 2024 Interior Bill, and it was a pleasure to work with Ranking Member Murkowski as we protected core programs and tried to minimize any negative impacts. But we need more support for tribal schools, for tribal law enforcement, tribal health care. And so what do you see happening if fiscal year 25 has another round of cuts, and you mentioned some of them? And I'll just open up with that concern, see what you're all seeing from the executive side. Either one of you, or both of you.
Thank you. Thank you for that question. The immediate that I have seen is, of course, a $73 million reduction in SFC. SFC, of course, is our water sewer infrastructure to Indian country. And any home that doesn't have water or sewer infrastructure is going to be impacted by some kind of a health issue. So the public health need here to make sure that we protect those sources of funds is absolutely critical. The second line item that we received a reduction is our electronic health record. Our electronic health record at the Indian Health Service is more than 40 years old, and that learning today and knowing today how significant that is for any healthcare system is imperative that we continue to stay on track as much as we can with our schedule and keep moving that forward so we can deliver improved healthcare to American Indians and Alaska Natives. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The short answer is that we'll see cuts to important services across Indian country. So at the FY24 enacted level, that already limited our ability to hire law enforcement officers across Indian country, which is laid out in my opening statement and submitted testimony, where we are well short, far short, of our obligation to Indian country when it comes to public safety funding. It will limit our ability to replace schools that are in poor condition. We're already 30 years out from replacing all of those schools. It will limit our ability to ensure that people in BIA and tribal detention centers are in humane conditions. 23 of those jails are already rated in poor condition, and we'll estimate in today's funds it will take over $600 million to replace those. So any cuts or limitations on our ability to make these investments will amplify what is already a big problem in so many tribal communities.
Yeah, a big challenge, and those challenges are made potentially higher by the pending Supreme Court case related to third-party billing within IHS programs, which would expand the responsibilities of what we've referred to as tribal sovereignty payments, administrative overhead, and leasing costs that the courts have said we need to pay. I've heard estimates that depending on how this Supreme Court decision comes out, it could result in immediate additional costs of $800 to $2 billion. Do you all have any update on that challenge? I think, Director So, this is more in your camp. And could you explain why that court decision might increase the cost so much?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Two things. One, we are definitely waiting for that final decision from the Supreme Court, but we're relying heavily on our current system that we have in place to calculate contract support costs, and we will continue to review those numbers to make sure that we do get to a more firm number as we move forward. Part of this also will require extensive tribal consultation that I want to be respectful for as we move towards agreement with tribes on how to calculate contract support costs.
Okay. Thank you, and you mentioned the challenge with electronic medical records. I must say this is one of my personal frustrations, that we have so many different systems and so many different parts of our government. It makes absolutely no sense to me at all. We have to reinvent this time and time again. So I'm going to ask my team to follow up on that, better understand where we are in that process, why it is we couldn't just adopt an electronic medical record system that had been developed for another agency rather than trying to invent it from scratch. Back when we were working on the Affordable Care Act, I really lobbied for us to have one system across America. Well, we ended up instead saying, let's just make it free competition, which we have many systems that don't talk to each other. It doesn't serve the health of Americans, and it has amplified the overall costs 1,000 times over. So just a personal frustration on that part. Secretary Newland, talk a little bit more about the law enforcement challenge that we're facing and what we should be doing and we are not getting done.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, there are so many components to this. I'll note that right now, the BI funds 198 law enforcement programs across Indian country. That includes 34 direct service tribes where the BIA is responsible for policing, and 164 tribally contracted law enforcement programs. That is less than half of all federally recognized tribes in the country, and as Ranking Member Merkley has noted, many public tribes in Public Law 280 states are facing similar challenges without the commitment of federal funding, and Mr. Chairman, you and I have spoken about this before as well. So the need is really high, and it's across the board. From law enforcement officers to tribal courts to detention facilities, and they all affect one another. When tribal courts are not fully staffed up, we get a lot more people in jails on pretrial detention. When people are housed in pretrial detention in the jails, that limits the capacity, and we have to move staff around, and we have to move inmates around to different locations, which takes officers off the beat to transport them. And so these all feed on each other. And, and we hear regularly from tribal leaders about the urgent need for more officers in their communities. And for those direct service communities where BIA is responsible, if there's a public safety crisis, we have to pull officers from one tribe and detail them to respond to that crisis. And so what that does is it creates a law enforcement shortage in the communities from which we've detailed those officers. And the overall level of investment, really leads to this situation, and that's why we've put forward, or the President has put forward in his budget proposal, to make these investments, to add hundreds of officers to tribal communities across the country, make investments in jail construction and operations and maintenance.
Thank you very much. Let's turn to our ranking member, Senator Murkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to talk about contract support costs and 105L tribal lease payments. From a budgetary perspective, this is one area that just continues to confound as we see these ever-escalating costs and just the unpredictability of it from a budgetary perspective. The request again proposes to reclassify contract support costs and 105L lease payments to mandatory beginning in FY26. As I look at this, functionally there's no difference to tribes if a reclassification happens, since the Interior Appropriations Bill provides a full funding for these accounts. So can you share with me, and this is going to be directed to both of you, what the functional difference for your respective agencies would be if we do reclassify that? And then give me some kind of a status update in terms of what you each are doing to meet the legal requirement that was laid out in Manilik versus Burwell, because both IHS and DOI have, you've both been directed to establish these guidelines regarding the parameters for which a lease agreement should be structured and paid for. But it seems that the agencies are taking a different approach here on how to structure those payments. So talk to me a little bit about CSC and 105Ls. Director So.
Thank you, Ranking Member, for that question. With regards to, again, contract support costs and our request to move it over to mandatory for both CSC and 105L, we believe that that is the best place for it to be to protect the rest of the Indian Health Service budget, the service and the facilities budget. We experienced this year that as a result of meeting those obligations, that we did face the reductions that we had in 2024. So that is our position with respect to believing that that's the best place for it to be to protect the budget for the Indian Health Service.
Assistant Secretary.
Sure. Thank you, Ranking Member, for the question. With respect to 105L leases, you noted the surge in demand over the last few years. We've gone from fewer than 5 to more than 600 in the pipeline. And so we've seen that, and we'd be happy to provide some of the charts and data to you and your team. We've seen the growth and the impact that puts on not only our staffing levels, but also our overall budget. With respect to the requirements from the case that you had mentioned, we have put guidelines in place for how we negotiate and reach these lease agreements with tribes and provide technical assistance along the way. And you'll see in the budget request that we've asked for additional staffing to help us with this, because it's become a bottleneck. We're still processing these with the same number of staff who did, fewer than 5 leases. So when they're providing technical assistance, that's time away from processing these leases. Going back to your first question, Madam Ranking Member, about the impact on the budget, given with respect to our mandatory proposal, I'm going to ask our Deputy Assistant Secretary to maybe speak on this for just a moment to be responsive.
Yeah, and I think our response would be similar to IHS in that by having it in the same discretionary pot along with public safety and justice, law enforcement activities, social services, forestry, the full gamut of BIE schools, the growth of 105L is going to squeeze out those other discretionary investments. By realigning on the mandatory side for what is already a mandatory legal requirement, we're simply matching the funding framework with the existing legal requirement to pay the leases.
Well, this is an area, again, where I think you've got a lot of attention from this committee. Director So, I want to ask you about the mandatory approach versus discretionary. and the proposal that's contained. The mandatory formula would increase IHS funding pretty dramatically, $42 billion in FY34. This is an increase of $35 billion over the 2024 total appropriation of $7 billion. This switch is going to cost about $289 billion and would be charged to whichever committee enacted the change to mandatory. But I also note that there's no legislative proposal accompanying the president's budget to accomplish this. So the question is whether or not you are anticipating transmitting authorization language to account for the proposed shift, and has there been internal conversation about how to pay for the shift to mandatory appropriations? Because we just can't talk about it on paper. You do that, it comes from somewhere. So has that been identified?
Yes, thank you, Ranking Member. I'm going to ask my colleague Jillian to respond. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director, and thank you, Senator, for that question. The kind of key focus that the IHS, the administration, has around preparing a legislative proposal for the mandatory budget request would be to partner with Congress in doing so. I know we've shared some technical assistance in previous years, but we'd be happy to continue those conversations with the key staff on both the appropriations and the authorizing side.
So I take it you're not prepared to transmit authorizing legislation at this point in time?
Not today, no.
Okay, thank you. We'll next turn to Senator Heinrich.
Thank you. Secretary Newland, in 2022, I passed the STOP Act to stop the illegal export of tribal objects of patrimony, sacred objects. Your budget request does not include any funding to implement the STOP Act. The last time I raised this issue, the Secretary gave me an answer about NAGPRA, but that is not my question. I want to know what your plans are, how you're going to implement the STOP Act, which is current law, and what funding will you use?
Thank you, Senator. And we're very grateful for that bill being passed into law, and we've been working with Indian country on developing regulations as called for in the law in concert with Department of Homeland Security and the State Department and Department of Justice. Our estimate at this time is that that program would be of a similar size and scope as the department's NAGPRA program. Part of the consultation with the regulations is about where we house STOP Act implementation at the department, and what we heard from Indian country is that it would be best housed within the Indian Affairs bureaus. And so we're trying to get to publication of these regulations that would formalize that and allow us to place it in our budget someplace. Senator, I think to get to the heart of your question about the costs to implement this, we estimate that they would be of a similar size and scope as the department's NAGPRA program, given the nature of the work. And then as we get into years of implementation, we'll get a better sense as to the need. I hope that is responsive.
I'm concerned that we're going to put off getting started for another year, and even without funding, this law has seen some success already. So I would just certainly I'm going to work with my colleagues here on the committee to start trying to identify funding in this fiscal year so that we can get this up and going.
Thank you.
Director, so you joined me a couple years ago at the Gallup Indian Medical Center. It is shameful, the condition that facility is in. I know IHS has been working with the Navajo Nation to identify a replacement site. Do you have an update on when a site will be selected, and what is IHS doing to move this forward?
Thank you, Senator. It's good to see you again. Yeah, I've been on a regular basis making contact with the Navajo Nation with respect to site selection. This is crucial for us to do the planning, appropriate planning, for this. In my recent conversation, I'm expecting at any point that the Navajo Nation will complete phase 2 of the site selection for 2 locations that they are working on. So I'm looking forward to that information as we move forward. However, as I think your staff was informed a couple weeks ago, that the situation that we're in at the Gallup Indian Medical Center is absolutely dire. We've actually had to close that facility for 24 hours within the last 30 days and move patients because of a water line, repair of a water line. It's not going to take much more, and I'm not sure it's gotten any better since we were there together. So I appreciate the $66 million that we have appropriated for that. But just as we have completed the last planning, we are looking at $1 billion. Knowing the costs of construction and everything that we're looking at, we're probably looking at least an additional 40% onto that to complete that new facility today.
Well, I look forward to working with you on this. It's long overdue and incredibly important for that portion of Indian country. Secretary Newland, I secured funding in the FY2024 appropriations bill for 4 new ballistics testing machines in New Mexico. And that's going to include 1 in Farmington and 1 in Gallup. These machines can help solve gun crimes in neighboring tribal communities as well. So I just want to urge BIA law enforcement to look to partner with the New Mexico Attorney General, who's going to be housing and looking after those new machines, to come up with an agreement so that BIA law enforcement can not spend their time driving to other NIBID machines. I mean, you know well the challenges of distance and how much time BIA law enforcement spends driving someplace. This is an opportunity for us to turn that around and be able to process evidence fairly close, and then have those BIA officers spending more of their time actually enforcing the law. So would love to work with you on that.
Thank you, Senator. We're absolutely committed to working with you and also the state on making sure we're keeping people safe in their communities and allowing police officers to be police officers.
Amen.
Thank you, Senator Murkowski, and thank you all for being here today. The Santee Sioux Nation, which is located in northeast Nebraska, has been under a no-drink order since 2019, and that's nearly 5 years. The water from Santee Sioux Nation's wells contains more than 50 times the safe limits of manganese, which, as you know, can cause serious adverse health effects. Multiple studies from different agencies, including 2 from IHS, have all shown the same thing. Santee and the surrounding areas are isolated from Nebraska's major population centers, and they must rely on bottled water, which is costly. In fact, the tribe pays $14,000 a month to buy that bottled water. The tribe received a grant from the BIA during the pandemic for around $150,000 for the bottled water. The funding from that grant ran out in 8 months. The tribe has a plan to remedy this problem and is pursuing funding from many different sources. And while they have had some success, the total cost of this project will be very expensive. In 2021, I was proud to vote for the infrastructure bill, which provided billions to IHS for sanitation projects just like this. Assistant Secretary Newland and Director So, can I have both of your commitments to work with me and the Santee Sioux Nation to fix this problem once and for all?
Yes, certainly with the Indian Health Service.
Thank you.
Yes, Senator.
Thank you. We look forward to getting this solved. Nebraska is also the home to 2 tribal colleges, Little Priest Tribal College and the Nebraska Indian Community College. These schools and other tribal colleges, which are often located in very rural areas, do a wonderful job in educating and preparing Native and non-Native students alike to have successful futures. Funding from the Department of Interior is critical. It is a critical part of these institutions' budgets, particularly in supporting operational costs as well as maintenance and repairs. For example, Many of the campus buildings at Little Priest Tribal College are decades old, with some dating back to the 1950s, and in need of continuous maintenance and repair to ensure a safe learning environment for the students. Flat funding from DOI for TCUs means that they have to use other resources to support these operational costs, and it also results in them having to defer key maintenance projects, which leads to higher costs down the road. A budget request is a statement of priorities. While DOI's budget request for Indian programs flat funds these key programs for TCUs, it proposes funding increases elsewhere, like a nearly $14 million increase for climate resilience and environmental justice programs at BIA. Given the limitations of budget caps for FY25, I am concerned about the department's priorities for Indian programs. Mr. Assistant Secretary, can you explain the rationale behind the department asking for flat funding for our TCUs?
Thank you, Senator. First, let me express my gratitude to you for advocating for TCUs. I sat on the board of a tribal college. And
they are fabulous.
Yeah, my wife presently teaches at a tribal college. You know, one of the challenges I think everyone here, including committee members, understands is with limited resources, trying to direct them where they're most needed. We develop our budget proposal in concert with tribal leaders through the Tribal Interior Budget Council, and often our priorities are a reflection of that ongoing dialogue. I've heard from a number of tribal leaders across the country about the present-day impacts of climate change. We've been asked to help them deal with the present-day effects of that, and the budget reflects that. And it is not necessarily a statement that tribal colleges are not important. I agree with you that when tribal colleges have investments and opportunities, that really good things happen on the ground for people. We have requested $16 million for tribal college and university facilities, and want to work with members of the committee and you, Senator, and leaders of tribal colleges to make sure that we're continuing to invest in those colleges because, again, they do just amazing things.
I look forward to working with you on that. And for the record, I'd like to submit some questions to you as well, dealing with the shortage of officers on the Winnebago Reservation. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Murkowski, and to our witnesses, welcome. It's good to have you here, and thank you for your service to our country. Secretary Newland, great to see you, a friend from Michigan, and it's always a pleasure to be in your company and appreciate your work. In my conversations with tribal leaders in Michigan, the issue of missing and murdered Indigenous people, MMIP, arises, unfortunately, all too often. Indigenous persons, as you know, experience disproportionately high rates of violence and relatedly are reported missing or murdered are at rates many times the national average. Michigan has not been spared from this crisis. Early this month, hundreds gathered in Grand Rapids, Michigan, to demand justice for the crisis and to mark May 5th, which President Biden proclaimed as Missing or Murdered Indigenous Persons Awareness Act. So my question for you, sir, is how does your fiscal year 2025 budget request support continuing work to achieve justice in these cases, as well as address the broader crisis that we're dealing with?
Thank you, Senator. And it's great to see you again as well. First, the budget starts with increased investments in tribal justice systems. And I want to also note that when we talk about that, we often are thinking about tribal justice in terms of cops and courts and jails, but it also includes increases to the Tiwahe initiative, which supports a lot of the work that tribes are doing on the front end to prevent bad things from happening in the first place. And so when you include the Tiwahe initiative increases that we've proposed, that total budget is over $700 million. It maintains investments in the missing and murdered unit that Secretary Holland has established, and Ranking Member Murkowski and I discussed yesterday at a separate hearing about our ongoing work to fully staff that up. And then, of course, make sure that we are closely coordinating with the FBI and U.S. Attorney's offices on enforcement and prosecution of cases, especially when they cross reservation boundaries.
Very good. I'm certainly very proud that Michigan's the home of over 50,000 Native people in 12 federally recognized tribal nations. And several of these tribes, as you well know, benefit annually from the Bureau of Indian Affairs Protection Implementation Program, the RPI. In Michigan, RPI funding enables a number of federally recognized tribes to establish and enforce conservation-based fishing, hunting and gathering regulations, invasive species monitoring, and other biological support services. So my question for you, sir, is could you explain how full funding for the Bureau's Rights Protection Implementation Program is absolutely critical, not just for our great state of Michigan, but all across the Great Lakes region?
Thank you, Senator. I could probably speak all day about how great that is, because I think it's an example.
If you can do it in a minute 45.
Yeah, it's a win-win-win because what it does is it also allows tribes to establish, the departments with professional staff, biologists and wildlife and environmental technicians who go out and do this work. Things like spraying boats off at the boat launch to prevent the transfer of invasive species. And really that's augmenting federal wildlife and environmental staff, state wildlife and environmental staff, and now you're adding tribes to the mix along with their traditional knowledge and practices as well. And it's putting more eyes on a lot of these threats to ecosystems like the Great Lakes, so we can respond to those threats sooner, and also amplifies the resources we have to respond when we see them.
Well, thank you. Thank you for your leadership and working on that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Hoeven.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Secretary Newland, as I mentioned to you yesterday at Indian Affairs Committee hearing 2 weeks ago, I asked Secretary Holland for a commitment to continue supporting the work of the Advanced Training Center at Camp Grafton. Secretary Holland stated she would speak with you about the Advanced Training Center and have staff work with our team to continue the good work that's being done at Camp Grafton. And as a member of the Appropriations Committee, I've continued to advocate for growing the number and type of training taking place at the Advanced Training Center. Also, as I noted yesterday, the BIA recorded 5,429 law enforcement and public safety personnel participating in training programs offered across all BIA police training facilities. Of this roughly 5,500 participants, about 4,000 training participants, obviously well more than half, received their training at the Advanced Training Center. It's also worth noting that the North Dakota National Guard, which owns and conducts its own training camp at Camp Grafton, has been a tremendous partner to both the BIA and the ATC. Can I once again get your commitment to work with us to leverage the ATC and ensure it has the necessary resources to provide advanced training so we can get more BIA law enforcement officers out on the reservation?
Thank you, Senator. Yes.
Very good. Thank you. I know it's been a long time since yesterday. I just want to make sure.
I always love also when my boss says, go talk to Brian. Thank you.
Thanks for your help and support on that. Administrator Sau, the Progress Act we passed, a couple years ago. Anyway, it's to streamline 638 contracting, giving tribes more control over services on the reservation, right? And so my questions, we passed it, then we passed it a second time because the rulemaking didn't get done in time. So we've actually passed it twice. But what's the status? How are we coming on that? Again, the whole idea is to expedite, the ability of tribes for self-determination and so forth. And like in the Farm Bill, we'll probably do more with FDIPR and food programs and that kind of thing. So what are we doing on that?
Thank you for that question. At present, we have 64% of our tribes that have contracted and compacted with the Indian Health Service. So we really are passing money directly to the tribes as they continue to do that. We also, right now, are in a number of negotiations that are working and moving as quickly as we can get them moved forward. And we anticipate that there are at least 11 tribes that are interested in contracting and compacting, and that we will execute those agreements within the timelines required.
Yeah, it's a good program, and we want to make sure that tribes that want to take advantage of it can do so. Yeah. And then my other question for you relates to the healthcare services. Over the last decade, funding for IHS is grown. But the life expectancy for American Indian and Alaska Natives is 11 years below that of other populations in the United States. Now, the budget before us is $8 billion, or includes $8 billion in discretionary funding, which is a 14% increase over the FY24 level. So we are increasing the resources, but wow, we're not seeing the catch-up in terms of longevity for both American Indians and Alaska Natives.
Thank you for pointing that out again, Mr. Senator. I really appreciate that. You know, there are a number of things that Indian Health Service continues to deal with across the board. I would say that the topics that keep me up at night is our workforce, and across the country, how fragile the healthcare system is across the country, let alone that to Indian country. So really looking at, again, the equities, the legislative proposals that we're asking for to make sure that we are on parity with at least the Veterans Administration or other federal organizations is very important. We have yet to talk about mental health today and how that's just absolutely critical right now in terms of the work that we're doing and everything that we do. It crosses over to the questions about law enforcement and all of these entities that need to come together when we're talking about this. And then the last thing I would say are the social determinants of health that are directly impacting our people every single day. I was out visiting a food distribution center within the last 45 days, and realizing now that our people in Indian country either have to choose between food stamps or a food box, and that more of our tribal people are choosing a food box versus using food stamps. That just tells me that we are in such a place now, and of course, I looked at the box that was being provided, and many of those things that were in the box were not exactly healthy items that then creates other health issues.
With the indulgence of the chair, I'll finish up very quickly, but okay, so you went right to my next question, which was behavioral health. I appreciate that. And that, going back to 638 on the food, is why that's so important, because in the Farm Bill, we set up a pilot program, and now in the Farm Bill, we're going to continue to expand that, and that's going to give tribes more control over the food that they can get, for their tribes. So whether it's bison or things that grow on reservation, all those kind of things, that opens that up for them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator. And we're going to turn now to Senator Sinema.
Thank you, Chairman Merkley. And thank you to our witnesses for being here today. Delivering results for tribal communities in Arizona has been one of my top priorities in the Senate, and I look forward to discussing a number of key issues with you both. The federal government's trust responsibilities to deliver water to our tribal communities is one of our most important duties. Last Congress, I was proud to introduce and secure unanimous support of the Hualapai Tribe Water Rights Settlement Act. This law ratifies the Hualapai Tribe's Colorado River Water Settlement Agreement and delivers approximately 4,000 acre-feet of critically needed water per year to the tribe. The President's budget requests $45 million for this settlement in FY2025. Assistant Secretary Newland, what is the BIA's priority for funding this agreement, and will the federal government meet its obligation regarding the enforceability date?
Thank you, Senator. First, it was my honor to visit Hualapai twice, once before the settlement to discuss it with tribal leadership, and we stood down on the banks of the river, and once to celebrate the settlement. So thank you for that. We have asked for $45 million to fund this, but on top of that, we have also asked for $2.8 billion in mandatory funding over the next 10 years to support the implementation of water settlements like the Wallapai bill. And it is every bit our intention to make sure that when a settlement is reached and when members of Congress work hard to enact it, that we fulfill our obligations to ensure that it's fully implemented.
And so are you on track for the enforceability date?
I believe so, that we are. And again, these investments that the president has requested will allow us to help make that happen.
Thank you. In recent years, 105L payments for tribal leases and contract support costs have created the situation where escalating requirements are negatively impacting the ability to use discretionary appropriations to support core tribal programs like health, education, and construction programs, or to provide essential fixed cost requirements. So Assistant Secretary Newland, in the department's written testimony for this hearing, and in testimony at other Senate and House hearings, you've expressed support for the President's request to reclassify both 105L leasing and contract support costs to mandatory funding. Can you explain why this is so important and what impact will be on the federal budget and the department's funding if we don't make the change? And then, after that, Director So, can you provide IHS's view on this matter as well? Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Well, first, these payments are mandatory, so we don't have a choice once a tribe has requested to enter a 105L lease and provide those payments. And if they're mandatory to provide, it's our view that they should, the funding should match that legal obligation. We've seen this program grow exponentially, or not exponentially, but significantly over the last 5 years, and that puts a squeeze on our discretionary funding for programs. And without mandatory funding and without this level of investment through appropriations, we're going to be forced to choose between fulfilling our legal obligations or providing the other funding that Congress appropriates for these programs to tribes. And I don't think that's not a position the department wants to be in, and I don't believe that's a position that Congress wants the nation to be in either. Thank you.
Thank you for that question. Of course, the same as what the Assistant Secretary is saying, but we have seen in 2024 the direct impact of where contract support costs on 105L sit right now today with the reduction of $440 million that impacted IHS as a result of trying to cover our responsibilities for that. We also believe that moving it into mandatory, moving both of those accounts into mandatory will protect the IHS services and facility budget.
Thank you. Director So, I was proud to deliver a historic $3.5 billion to address the construction and maintenance backlog of IHS sanitation facilities. Can you provide me with a progress report on where IHS is at clearing the project backlog?
Yes, thank you for that question as well. In 2024, the Indian Health Service, with the 24 allocation, we are now looking at 91 additional projects that we are working on that will address 10,000 homes across Indian country. We are also to date tracking 680 projects total that will improve the homes of our tribal communities for 102,000 individuals that live across Indian country. So we know that we have a ways to go. We are also struggling with a workforce issue, but we also have updates on our website at the IHS that's tracking every project, every dollar, and every timeline. And that's our commitment to make sure that we are accountable and transparent with the dollars that we appreciate receiving. Thank you.
Chairman, I know my time's expired. If I might ask one quick follow-up question.
Yes, very quickly, please.
Thank you. It's imperative that another backlog doesn't develop. So what is IHS's plan to continue providing for these projects after those infrastructure funds expire?
Thank you again for that question. So we have been working to make sure that we are crossing over not just on these dollars, but working across the federal government with our partners to make sure that we just signed an agreement with BOR of some of the work that we can do to make sure that we're combining all of our resources together and leveraging that to complete projects, not just the ones that are on the current list, but the backlog that's also growing today.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Senator Tester.
I'll thank the chairman and ranking member for having this hearing. I want to thank you all for being here. It's good to see you. Thanks. I'm going to ask you a couple questions here. Brian, has nothing to do with the budget. I'm going to get to that in a minute. We got tribes in Montana that have 638 contracts for law enforcement. And then we got tribes in Montana that depend on the BIA for law enforcement. On 638 contracts, do you look at that? Do the tribes get the same amount of money as the BIA would normally spend on a 638 contract?
Are you asking?
So what I'm asking you, if BIA provides the law enforcement and then they want to go with the 638, do they get the same amount of money the BIA was spending anyway, or do they get nicked back a bit?
That's not what the law says. One of the challenges we face, Senator, is as new tribes come into 638,
yep,
we can't pull funding from other tribes that already have a contract.
I've got you, but what I'm saying is BIA spends X amount of dollars for law enforcement, and that tribe doesn't want the BIA doing anymore. They think they can do a better job, and they want to do the 638. Is that money that for the 638 contract an equivalent amount than what would be spent by the BIA to provide that same law enforcement?
It is supposed to be, Senator.
Okay. I'd like to ask you to look into that, because I've had a lot of tribes, not once, not twice, but many times say, look, they spend far less on us than they do. That's one point. Second point is this. Is this budget adequate to take care of law enforcement? Now, you know better than anybody, law enforcement in any country is not so good. I think many of the tribes are bigger than, large land-based tribes are bigger than the states, and they just have a few officers. Right. And what we're seeing is what crooks do. They'll go to where they can get away committing crimes, and sometimes that's in Indian country. So my question for you is this budget adequate to take care of the crime issues that are occurring in Indian country?
I will say this, Senator, in response. We've reported to Congress just several months ago that the total need and obligation is $3.1 billion.
Yes.
And our budget request through the BIA is over $600 million. I can't find the exact number, but 651. Yeah, $651 million.
So the budget request is $651 million.
Correct.
And the need is $3.1 billion.
Correct.
How can we expect Indian country to be now? So where did this come from? I mean, so one of the things that I've been on this committee for a while now. One of the things that I always argue is you can never get what you need unless you tell people what you need.
Right.
How are you telling us a different story here? I mean, 650 million versus 3.1 billion. Now, I'm not sure it'll take 3.1 billion, but I'm telling you what we got right now is inadequate.
Correct. So, Senator, what I will say in response to that is I will voice 100% agreement with you and other members of the committee that we need more officers, we need more funding for law enforcement in Indian country. And we've proposed to increase by $33 million the amount of funding that would allow us to hire more cops.
That's good, because I think more cops on the beat are important. Right. The MMIP problem, people have talked about it, I'm sure. I wasn't here for the whole hearing, but they were here when I was here talking about it. They ain't never going to be fixed unless we get more people on the beat. Would you agree?
I would agree with that, Senator.
Well, we got a serious problem, and it needs to be fixed. And people are dying because of it. And that's not an overstatement. People are dying. Lives are being ruined. It's a problem. I need you to be more vocal, okay?
Thank you.
You got a great chairman and ranking member on this committee. They understand the issues that are out there. We need to drive it home to the rest of this committee and Congress. So that's number one. Now I've got to talk to you, Director. The statistics show that Native Americans live 17 years fewer. They die 17 years quicker than everybody else. I think it's because of health care. Crime's a part of it, but we're just going to assume the health care thing. You got a diabetes epidemic. You've got folks who the life and limb stuff, which I haven't heard about with the advanced funding, but the truth is it's still out there. How do you set right now as far as recruitment of doctors and nurses and support staff in Indian country?
Thank you for that question, Senator. We are across the board at 29% vacancy rate at the Indian Health Service right now.
So you're at about third last. Does this budget get you to a point where you can fill those positions?
No.
And how much is this, I hate to ask this question, how much is this part of the budget short? The law enforcement was $2.5 billion short. How much is this one short?
In the recent consultation that we had with tribes, their estimate for the health care need is at $53 billion.
And how much is in this budget?
A little bit over $8 billion.
I mean, how do you fulfill trust responsibilities with those kind of numbers? I don't, you know, I mean, I'm way over time, and Van Hollen's going to kick me out of here in a minute, but I don't know what we do about this. I do know that you guys understand this issue, but we've got to do better. We've got to figure out how to do better. We put you guys in a lose-lose position. We'll bring you in front of the committees and we'll beat the crap out of you because you're not doing your job, but if you don't have the resources to be able to, now if you're wasting the money, you're going to hear about it. But the truth is, if you're not wasting the money, we need more cops on the beat. We need more doctors. We need more nurses. The works. Otherwise, these numbers are going to continue to grow. Cartels are going to continue to move into Indian country. Thank you.
Senator Tester, thank you very much for really hammering that point home. Much appreciated. Senator Van Hollen.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Merkley, Ranking Member Murkowski, and thank you, Assistant Secretary Newland, and Director Sau for being here, and your team. You know, I'm proud to say that Maryland is home to American Indian and Alaskan Native communities, sizable numbers. People don't think about Maryland that way. We have 3 state-recognized tribes: the Piscataway Indian Nation, Piscataway Conoy Tribe, and the Akahanak tribe. And we're also the proud home of the Indian Health Service. And I do want to associate myself with the remarks of Senator Tester on the budget, because I've not served on this subcommittee as long as he has, but there's a chronic underfunding of the Indian Health Service. And now, because you have many members of tribes living off of reservations and in urban settings, ensuring access to comprehensive, culturally relevant health care at the urban Indian organizations is critical for our communities. And it's especially important that American Indian and Alaskan Native people continue because they continue to face currently the worst health outcomes, as we just heard from Senator Tester, and as you know. According to the Kaiser Family Foundation, these communities have the shortest life expectancy compared to all other racial and ethnic groups. The Indian Health Service spends about 1% of its overall budget on the urban Indian health program. So, Dr. So, what are some of the limitations today to urban Indian health organizations being able to provide the care they need to? And what are some specific proposals in the administration's budget that might address that issue?
Thank you very much for that question. Of course, in 2025, we are asking for an increase for the urban programs. As I travel across Indian country, and particularly to our urban programs, the work that they do in our urban communities is amazing with the resources that we give them. And so there's a lot that we can learn from the urban programs in terms of how creative they are and what they can do to stretch that dollars as we move forward. However, what we are looking at the Indian Health Service is trying to streamline and improve how the Indian Health Service works with our urban programs to build those efficiencies, to make sure that we support them in everything that they do. One of the things that I have been working on is making sure that, again, in their ability to get reimbursement that is equal or similar to the Indian Health Service is absolutely critical. So when we talk about having 100% FMAP reimbursement, or using the Indian Health Service all-inclusive rate is absolutely critical. Again, just building parity across Indian country is something that I would like to see happen. Either one of those, either use the IHS all-inclusive rate or build in the 100% FMAP for the urban programs. That would take them a significant ways to meet the needs that of the people they serve.
Well, thank you for identifying that issue. I do look forward to working with you to make that happen, because I met recently, with some of our communities that have been, negatively impacted by the lack of resources to the urban Indian health services. As you know, the President's budget for the Indian Health Service includes targeted funding to address some of the most pressing public health challenges, including identifying HIV, hepatitis C, and substance use conditions that are often co-occurring. And I want to focus specifically on hepatitis C because the treatment for hepatitis C is very effective. Nearly 98% recovery over a 12-week period. And yet, because of barriers to care, including cost and prior authorization requirements, close to 4 million people in the United States are estimated to have chronic hepatitis C. Many who do not know that they have the symptoms in time for accurate diagnosis and unintentionally spread the virus. I'm actually working on a bipartisan proposal to address this. But I would like to know more about what your thinking and planning is on these issues, because hepatitis C is the leading cause of liver failure and cancer, claiming the lives of almost 15,000 Americans each year. So, Dr. So, can you talk about the disproportionate impact of hepatitis C on American Indian and Alaska Native communities and current barriers to diagnosis, screening, and treatment?
Thank you for that question, Senator. So one of the things that that we're seeing across, of course, we know that as the 2021 data presents, that American Indians and Alaska Natives have 3 times the rate of other nationalities or other groups of people. And then we also have 3 times the rate of mortality when it comes to Hep C. But we also agree that they are absolutely treatable. And of course, the President's 2025 budget asked for additional $10 million to address this. We are looking today at expanding screening and testing at every opportunity that we have, and we will continue to do that. We're also targeting pre- and post-exposure therapies that will help our patients that might fall into this category, and working with our tribal representatives that are on the ground to make sure that we communicate and educate as much as we can. That is absolutely critical in what we do. And of course, the coordination across a tribal healthcare system, or a community rather, is so important to make sure that there is understanding and education of how we can beat this, how we can make sure that we're treating Hep C for all of our patients.
I thank you. I appreciate that. And it's a tragedy when you've got a disease that is killing this many people, when we have a treatment that we know works, right? Almost 100% of the time. So people are needlessly dying in the United States from Hep C. We have a cure. We just need to make sure that we identify the people who have it and make sure that they get this treatment. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. I'm going to ask just one question, given the shortness of time, and then submit the rest of my questions for the record. Then I'm going to turn over the hearing to Senator Murkowski, and she will close out the hearing when she completes her questions. I hold a town hall in each of my 36 counties each year, and folks are welcome to come and talk about whatever they want. In Umatilla County this weekend, 5 young tribal members from the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Reservation came and spoke. They're the 5 who are in the center of this picture above. Their names are Sunhawk, Anahi, Abigail, Lisa, and Luca. They asked me the following questions, so I'm asking you those questions. They wanted to know what more we can do to address the challenge of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. They asked what we can do to decrease drug addiction, what we can do better to address suicide, and how we can provide more mental health resources. I'll start with you, Director So, since these are mostly healthcare questions.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. Some very tough questions there in terms of the work that we do at the Indian Health Service. Absolutely, this is something that we need to make sure that we're using all available strategies, whether they're telehealth, again, being at the community level to better understand what are the challenges there, what can we do, and to make sure that we're mitigating some of these activities. The education, the mental health, again, I think has so much to do in this space, and more work needs to be done in that particular area to make sure that we are creating a healthy place for people. One of the things that I want to do before the end of the year is really look at our ability to utilize joint venture authority to make sure that there are facilities outside the traditional hospitals and clinics, but maybe looking at treatment centers, treatment facilities that need to be built, that need to be available and closer to the homes of tribal community members so they can go and seek treatment. Right now, even those are scarce. So when a patient is ready to go, you've got to have a place for them to go, or that time that will probably pass on us. And so I think having more resources on the ground near tribal communities is critical.
One of the things I'm pondering is the fact that we have too few mental health counselors in America, and in particular need trained tribal members in the context of tribal tradition, and how we can possibly help increase the number of counselors. Would you like to add anything, Secretary Newland?
Thank you, Chairman. We've been talking a lot about resources and appropriations here. And at the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs yesterday, we talked about safety, which you relayed from the young people. And I've spoken with you, Senator, Chairman, and Ranking Member Murkowski about some of the challenges with Public Law 280 and how that makes it difficult for tribes to keep people safe. That law was passed in a time when Congress and the government were trying to terminate the existence of tribes altogether. 50 years ago, we relegated that policy to history's dustbin, but Public Law 280 continues to reach up from that era and hold us back. And when it comes to safety in communities, we are now trying to build a public safety regime based on self-determination on the foundation of a law that was passed during termination. And it really makes it difficult for tribes to keep those young people safe when they don't have the ability to control how public safety is administered in their communities. And so that's one of the responses I would give to the young folks who've spoken to you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you, and I really compliment these 5 young tribal members for stepping forward to make their questions at my town hall. And they are questions we should be asking all across America, and I know they're questions that you all are working on, and I'll continue to follow up with you on that. With that, let's turn this over to Senator Murkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Those are questions that we all seek answers to, so I think there's unified support trying to figure this out, because it's about safety, it's about life, it's about community. I want to ask you a question, Assistant Secretary Newland, that I hear a lot about when I'm back home, and this is the probate backlog. It is, the words that I have in my notes are unreasonably long periods of time. It's really unacceptably long periods of time. We're hearing that some of our Alaska Native families are waiting 6 years before BIA is able to assemble their probate case for adjudication. And okay, we understand that sometimes things just take some time, but think about what happens to these families while they're waiting. Their loved one has passed. There's no denying that. There's no turning back on that. But it then pauses or freezes the ability to do anything. More often than not, it's the home. It's the family home. And so you have a situation where families are denied ownership of their lands. They're unable to build a home or even to renovate an existing home. And so in one of the communities that I was in just recently, what I heard, we were doing a little drive-through in the community, and there was a home that they pointed out no one has lived in for 5 years. Now, the housing issue in this was Minto, very acute as it is in so many other places. And nobody can live in it until they wrap up the probate. And so I looked at the budget to see what you're looking at for probate casework services there at BIA. It's an increase, 1.2 million above the 14 million enacted. Just, I mean, you want to talk about a drop in the bucket to solve the problem. So we've asked BIA to provide us with a cost estimate for the resources that are needed to reduce the probate backlog to less than 2 years. We have not received a response on this, so I would ask that you get back to me in writing with an update. In doing that, I think we need you to share the same urgency that these families have. And I don't know whether you are considering whether the BIA can do more to actually support things like will writing services or transfer upon death deeds to help keep the backlog from getting worse. But you have to admit that this is just a travesty of a process right now.
I agree, Ranking Member, and we have asked for that. I think my last check, the number of probate cases was well north of 40,000. And we can get you those exact numbers. And I will go back today, work with our team to make sure we get you a written response to your inquiry. We work with the Office of Hearings and Appeals at the Department of the Interior on these. One of the other areas, not directly relevant in Alaska, Senator, but with probate is the level of fractionation across Indian country, and the budget also requests a continuation of what began with the Cobell settlement to invest in land consolidation, which will help on the front end of that. But you're talking about the back end when cases get to probate. And certainly there are, we are trying to add to that. And we were just discussing this, I think, yesterday morning in out years about how to address this problem more aggressively. But I will make sure we respond to your written inquiry.
What about support for some kind of assistance? Again, whether it's will writing, it seems to me that there's little things that we can do that we might not. It's not gonna change you from your 6-year backlog to 2-year, but is the agency looking at doing any more of this?
I know that's something that the first time I was at the Department of the Interior that we had worked on. I can get you an answer on how that work goes. And I know a big challenge in the past has been trust in the BIA. When we show up and offer help, building that license and that trust in communities so that they view it as help and not as something else.
Well, it's something that we have failed in that trust responsibility. We have just absolutely failed there. Another issue that kind of tangentially relates on the housing side is the BABA, Build America, Buy America, and what we've seen is that you've got multiple agencies that have issued waivers from the application of the BABA requirements as applied to the tribal recipients. That's good, that helps, but the problem is that many of these are set to expire this summer, which is coming up pretty quick. And this includes HUD's tribal general applicability waiver and a whole bunch of others. So I'm sending a letter today to OMB requesting a 5-year waiver of BABA preferences for all federal financial assistance programs for tribes of infrastructure projects. So you know the issue, you know how challenged and challenging these requirements are. I think we all agree we would love to see more that is built here in this country and bought here. But when I have tribal housing authorities come and say the stove that will provide heat to these little houses, believe it or not, is only available in Japan, and so we don't have anything right now. So what am I going to do to get this house that we have now finished, give it a little bit of heat? So I guess the question to you is, how is the White House Council on Native American Affairs and the Bureau of Indian Affairs working with OMB on a more comprehensive approach to address the BABA implementation issues?
Thank you, Senator. We're actually engaged or kicking off a tribal consultation process right now on this. I think our first session is in June. We'll be happy to get your team information on those dates and where they're going to be held and follow up on that. But this has been a source of or a subject of conversation at the department and through the White House Council for some time.
Yeah, well, it's, as you know, and I think both of you have heard it in different applications in different areas, I think the whole table here. So help us with this, because it is frustrating, a lot of good initiatives, and I think in a way that was just not intended. Director, so let me ask you about the joint venture JVCP program. We obviously see great benefit to this in Alaska. Right now, Mount Edgecombe Medical Center there in Sitka, which is a joint venture construction project, is requesting about $47 million for staffing and operation of the new package. We're really excited about this. I think, have you had a chance to see it? If you haven't been to Sitka yet, it should be on your travel list, because this is so far from the facility that has been basically providing for healthcare services since World War II era. So this is a big deal. But we've been seeking a little bit of clarity from IHS on the eligibility of tribes for a joint venture construction program if they have been awarded congressionally directed spending. And that's going to matter, because we get the requests. We want to do what we can to help facilitate it. But if it then is determined that a CDS funding for planning or design deems the tribe ineligible for JVCP consideration, that's an entirely different thing. So can you give me a little more clarity on that?
Thank you, Ranking Member. So we are doing some work with regards to our joint venture. As I've shared before, that we are looking to run an updated joint venture, as Congress has directed us, between 3 to 5 years coming up here before summer. That is my goal. That is our timeline, to run a new application process before summer. As a result of that, and as a result of comments that I've received from tribes, we're also updating and reviewing our eligibility processes to make sure that they are fair and open to all tribes that choose to do that. So I'm expecting that we'll be making some changes with regards to our process to make sure, again, that it's fair and consistent. With regards to the staffing package, though, those come as the projects are completed, and so we will continue to work with each of the joint venture recipients to make sure that we are putting forth their staffing packages for funding.
So with regards to this process that you're going through this summer, you've mentioned that you have done consultation. Do you have some kind of a working group that is providing some form of input to evaluate and make changes to the program then? I mean, it sounds like you've had a process underway for a bit.
Yes, I do have an advisory group, the Facilities Appropriations Advisory Group, that looks at all of the facility infrastructure work for the Indian Health Service, but I have not completed tribal consultation. So if there is going to be a change, we will make sure that that goes to tribal consultation before anything is finalized. So we're going to have to run these pretty quickly to make sure that we get the input that we want from Indian country.
Okay, all right, thank you for that. I briefly mentioned ANMC, the Alaska Native Medical Center in Anchorage, the only tribal regional referral hospital in the state. As you know, we've supported the use of the non-recurring expenses fund for construction and renovation there at ANMC, and I'm just hopeful that we can find a way forward as, I mean, you think about the role that they play as this, I mean, it's regional, but it's not. It's absolutely a facility that is a statewide facility, but it is a federal facility, and we have to ensure that it's meeting the IHS mission of delivering really quality and comprehensive care, and the structure itself is just bursting at the seams. And I know you have had plenty of opportunity to walk through, to listen, but if you need more reinforcement as to why we need to prioritize the efforts there at ANMC, we'll take you through yet another walkthrough because it's so vitally important.
Thank you, Ranking Member. Just for your information, I'll be up there all next week again, so I will be landing in Anchorage on Monday. I intend to have a conversation with regards to the facility again and look at ways that we can help address that. We know right now there's $17 million that have been allocated from the Indian Health Service, and so we need to know what the difference is there that is needed to complete that, or at least move that project forward. So I'm excited about that. That's one of the things that is on my list of priorities to evaluate and see what we can do to get that project completed.
Good. I appreciate working with you on that. We were expecting a report on the purchase referred care program policies focused on reimbursing travel costs. Apparently, we gave you a 180-day deadline to do that. Do you know if you're on track, when we might expect that?
Thank you again, Ranking Member. I will definitely follow up on that with respect to that. I have shared before we are doing extensive amount of work with regards to PRC and making sure that we do that. Our recent updated guidelines with regards to expenditures of PRC do include travel. So we know that in Alaska, I know the challenges there for just overall PRC. So we are taking a look at that as well.
Okay. Well, if you can just kind of pay attention to that deadline, that timeline, because that kind of information I think is going to be instructive. This is for you, Assistant Secretary Newland. I was in Alaska in mid-April and had an opportunity to visit with the new project manager for the Newtok-McDarvik, the relocation from Newtok up to McDarvik. When I say new, she was maybe 10 days on the job. And I have to tell you, what she shared with me, along with a couple other residents from Newtok, really concerned me. Just with a lack of coordination, and we've been working on this move for decades. A lot of federal funds that have gone there, and they were updating me with the condition of the school and the erosion undercutting the school, and the fact that they were going to be closing the school at the end of this school year, so like right now, and it's gone, it's done. And I think everybody had thought that we had a little more time. Anyway, I am encouraged now, about 6 weeks later, that there is much greater coordination. We've got anybody who has anything, any involvement with that project that is engaged. I think we've got a plan for how to move the remaining families, how to begin a new school year up there. But I'm just reminded that we've got 144 environmentally threatened communities, maybe not all in the same dire situation as Newtok, but with the potential to get there. And so know that these are front and center in my mind. We've got to be working together, but I think we have to recognize that this is not one agency, this is not one entity, this is everybody here. You got to get your friends from EPA and from transportation and HHS. We have some significant challenges just in coordination for these small communities. Last question for you, Secretary Newland, and this follows on our hearing yesterday when I asked you about the timeline for consultations with regards to the PL 280 states. You were unsure yesterday, so I don't know if you have more detail to that or whether you need to get back to me still.
No, we were able to confirm that we will meet the September deadline from the committee report to complete that consultation period. And I think the letter will be going out pretty soon, and those consultations will be happening this summer.
Okay, good. And then I've got a couple others, but I've kept everybody over the allotted time, and I appreciate your fielding all of these questions that the committee has had, and I know you're going to be responding to members' questions for the record. So if there's nothing else, the hearing record will be open until close of business May 30th, 2024. So thank you. And if there's no further comments, we stand adjourned.